It's time for some amusing musings. Hello and welcome to RotD Review of the Day, and today I am looking at the 2017 horror movie Muse, or Musa. This was kind of a weird one for me. There were a lot of elements of this movie that worked well, but when they were all brought together, I found it a little bit lackluster, and the big overarching thing that I kept thinking as the movie kept going was how much better this would have worked as a novel than a movie. And then I looked it up, and it's based on a novel. And honestly, I think it should have been kept there. Let's get into why. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the plot of this one was very interesting. It was very unique. But there was just too much mythos and too much backstory. This is why, one of the reasons why this really would have worked better sticking to just being a novel as opposed to making a movie. The plot follows a writing professor that, a poetry enthusiast, a writer that befalls some tragedies and is thrown into a happenstance situation where he is experiencing the same bad dream repeatedly, and come to find out on the news that in his dream a woman dies in a very particular fashion, and find out on the news that this actually happened. So that takes him down a little bit of a rabbit hole where he gets into a supernatural world of muses, of which floating around in the world there are 7. And each one has a very different role. She who hides, she who impassions, she who lies, and each one kind of fits their character traits fit the bill of who she is. And what it winds up being, I'm not going to give a whole lot of spoilers as for what happens with the plot, but I really have to kind of explain the nature of the muses. They've existed for as long as poetry has, and they have influenced the great works of mankind, as muses do. But the words are tricks. The muses have a malevolence to them, and when spoken properly, the words of a poet may have a diabolical power to them. If you're reciting a passage by Yeats about cutting of a limb, then by speaking it just so, or by a muse speaking it, it turns into a weapon and a cut will appear on somebody. And that is another thing that I thought was interesting about this. Unique, very. Interesting, yes. Cinematic, I have to argue that it really wasn't. Would it work in the context of a novel? Absolutely. It absolutely could. You could deal with a lot of backstory. You can deal with a lot of world building, and you can sell that really well. But cinematically, when you have one character who's on screen and terrified by another, and she whispers into his ear a passage from Neruda, okay, I guess that's evil. So what really drove this movie was more the characters than anything else, and they were well written. It was perhaps just a little bit too dreary throughout, but the material was pretty dreary. You had some pretty damaged characters going through some pretty hellacious events. This was a good example of something that conceptually works really well, but is not necessarily meant to be on celluloid for an hour and a half. It's just not the medium it's supposed to be in. So I give the plot a 14 out of 25. As a novel, probably worked pretty well. I'm interested in actually reading it at this point. As a screenplay, not so much. Which gets us into the intent, and not surprisingly, I gave that a 9 out of 25. Not terrible, But for all the reasons that I mentioned before, it didn't sell me. There were some elements of this that were trying to be scary. I just don't think they were. There wasn't a whole lot of scary to be had, either through jump scares, terror, dread, any of it. And I mentioned the character's moroseness there. It did kind of bring it down a little bit in tone, and ultimately the big problem is, I mean, okay, you're going to have a dreary backstory. Seven was really good about that, but the one thing that made it good in terms of characters was the chemistry they had together. Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt playing off each other and complimenting each other and contrasting with each other, and the chemistry was really there. In this one, the two main leads, it just wasn't. I didn't feel any connection with their characters. There wasn't a whole lot going on there. So, taking away the scary elements and just having an interesting movie, I felt that the big binding element that could drive this, which was the characters, it really wasn't there a whole lot. So, yeah, 9 out of 25. The acting I gave a 20 out of 25. There were really some stellar performances in this. Elliot Cowan and Franca Potente did an amazing job with their individual characters that they had. And they had to deal with some pretty intense, across-the-board emotions and deliver some impact-heavy performances, and they did. They nailed it. The chemistry they had between each other, I think, was more of a fault of direction and editing than acting. Perhaps they could have tweaked it a bit, their performances, to engage with that. I don't know, but on the whole, I would say the acting was very solid in this, above average, and 20 out of 25. Also noteworthy was a small performance appearance by Christopher Lloyd, who we're starting to see in horror more. I Am Not a Serial Killer, and now this, I am all about that. He did a really great job. It was a very small role, but there's no small roles. There's only small actors, and he's not a small actor. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it. The technical, I gave an 18 out of 25. The effects were pulled off really well. There was some CG, there was some blood, some gore, some body effects, and I thought all of it worked pretty well. Any failures that this movie had, I'm not going to attribute to the acting or the technical categories. I would say ultimately it is more plot, intent, direction, script, all that. So good technical abilities, 18 out of 25 for that, which gives us a total of 61 out of 100, which lands us pretty much with exactly how I felt about it. It was a skosh above average. It was pretty much average, just on the higher end of it. It was not a bad movie. It just didn't come together. It just didn't gel, and the concept never really got sold for me. So, I would not recommend this movie to people, but I would not dissuade them from it. If they wanted to watch it, if they saw it, hey, Christopher Lloyd has a small role in this, I love him, so by all means watch it and enjoy it, and see what you think, and then write me some comments below. I would love to hear from you. If you saw this and you disagree with me, if you agree with me, whatever, I would love to hear from you and engage in discussion about this one. So please leave comments below. If you like these videos, please click subscribe. And other than that, I really appreciate you making me a part of your day. And next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.